Buonasera, ben arrivati.
Good evening and welcome. The drama of a new beginning, prophets of our time. What we're doing tonight is something new. It's most of an attempt. It's a sort of ironic attempt. By ironic, I mean that the value of what's inside this meeting does not really depend on the result. Although I believe that the result tonight is going to be good. It's an ironic attempt, as I said, and brave enough. Because when you're trying to do something, it's because you're brave enough to do it. So thank you very much to Costantino Esposito for accepting the risk of making this attempt. We asked him to do so, and I bear responsibility for asking him to do so. So it's my fault. Blame me. Thank you for your passion in making this attempt possible, and thank you to all your friends sharing with you this passion and sharing with you the organization of this event, of this gesture. This is how I define tonight's event. It is not a meeting, it is not a show, it's a bit more, it's something more, it's a gesture, it's something that will involve us as audience and protagonists. It's something that we're going to do together. The idea stems from the willingness to convey some contents. We wanted to convey a message, we wanted to convey some contents which to us are very dear. And they're so dear that we wanted to propose this content as poems. Not because the other ways to convey, to communicate are not noble, but because poetry is in itself somewhat extraordinary. Therefore, music, poetry, and images will be used. All these arts will be used to give the voice to theologians and philosophers who, to some extent, are peculiar. They were prophets in our times. Poetry will give a voice to philosophers. Is there anything in common between philosophers and theologians who are prophets? What's the common point between prophecy and poetry? Now, reading the text that Costantino prepared, I have an answer to this question. What there is in common between prophecy and poetry is to go beyond what can be seen, go beyond the contingent. Prophecy looks beyond, and poetry reads beyond. So, we will now be enjoying tonight's attempt. And this is what we will be and how we will feel while listening to this attempt. The aim is to help us better understand the time we're living. Will this attempt work? Will we be moved? Will we manage to understand poetry in prophecy? The aim is to better understand life and reality. So, inspired by these prophets, will we be able to feel more as protagonists of this new beginning? So the idea for us is to be conquered and excited by this attempt so that we can be more aware to be protagonists of this new beginning. It's nice to be excited. It's nice to be moved by poetry. It's nice to feel emotions before beauty. But just because we want to repossess ourselves. Emotions and excitement before beauty doesn't make sense because we have to repossess ourselves. And this is what we want to get from tonight's attempt. We want to feel excited before what we will listen so that this can help us repossess ourselves so that we can launch a new beginning and enter into a new beginning. Thank you.
L'uomo folle. Avete sentito di quel folle uomo?
The madman. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, "I'm looking for God, I'm looking for God." As many of those who did not believe in God were standing together there, he caused considerable laughter. "Have you lost him then?" said one. "Did he lose his way like a child?" said another. "Or is he hiding? Is he scared of us? Did he emigrate?" They shouted and laughed in this manner. The madman sprang into their midst and pierced them with his look. "Where has God gone?" he cried. "I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. We are all his murderers. But how have we done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we enchained this earth from the sun? Where is it moving now? And where are we moving now? Away from our suns? Aren't we perpetually falling? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions. Is there any up or down left? Aren't we straying us through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Hasn't it become colder? Isn't more and more night coming on all the time? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's putrefactions? God's to decompose. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we, the murderers of all murderers, comfort ourselves? That which was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet possessed has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? With what water could we purify ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games will we need to invent? Isn't the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods, simply to seem worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever shall be born after us, for the sake of this deed, he shall be part of a higher history than all the history that came before. Here, the madman fell silent and again regarded his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last, he threw his lantern to the ground, and it shattered and went out. "I come too early," he said then. "My time hasn't come yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still traveling. It has not yet reached human ears. Lightning and thunder need time. Deeds need time after they had been done before they can be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars. And yet, we have done it ourselves." It has also been related that on the same day, the madman entered various churches and there sang a Requiem Aeternam Deo. Let out and told to shut up, he is said to have retorted each time, "What are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?" That was the famous paragraph of the Gay Science by Friedrich Nietzsche, published between 1882 and 1887, but already full of the drama of the spirit of the 20th century. God has died, we've heard from Giampiero, and we were his murderers. Yet, with this deed, we did not simply lose the reference to an absolute moral value, but we also lost our own place in the world. The death of God is accomplished in the death of the ego, as depicted in these faces, tortured faces by Francis Bacon, and as we heard in the moving music of by Gaston Casado. This dissolution of the human beings is recognized prophetically by a great French theologist, Henri de Lubac, in a book published in 1943 titled The Drama of the Atheist Humanism. De Lubac tries to understand what happened with the arrival of nihilism in the bourgeois culture in Europe between 2 centuries. Nihilism which casts a shadow up to our own present day. Listen to de Lubac, and I quote, what happened, what has become of man by this atheist humanism, a being that can still hardly be called a being, a thing that has no content, a cell completely immersed in a mass that is in the process of becoming a social and historical man, of whom all that remains is pure abstraction, apart from the social relations and the position in time by which he is defined. This man is dissolved, whether because of myth or dialectics, Nazism, or the Bolshevik ideals. By losing truth, man loses himself. And there is no man, there is no longer any man, because there is no longer anything that is greater than man. Yet, what do we talk about when we talk about God, the God who is dead, or the living God? Here, nihilism makes the code of moral tradition of Christianity collapse, or better, the code of Christianity, which is not more than a moral law, a norm of ethical behavior. And here we are forced to recognize the content, which is not to be taken for granted, of the words that we are using. De Lubac said that humanism, atheist humanism, could not but go bankrupt. In bankruptcy, man is man only because his face is lightened by a divine ray. God is not only the norm for man, which is imposed to man and leading man, lifts him up. He is the absolute, funding man. It is a magnet attracting him. What is beyond which excites man, the eternal being offering the only climate in which man can breathe. This is what impressed me of de Lubac. He manages to understand and to suffer the enormous drama that had been described by Nietzsche, the death of God, because de Lubac knows what the living God is. Only one who knows what the living God is can understand the drama of the death of God. And so nihilism, intended as the dominion of the absolute immanence, there's nothing else. It inevitably transforms this surplus, this transcendence, as the breathing of the human being, the opening up of intelligence, and it transforms this into the acceptance of fate, of the blind destiny, blind fate, when the ultimate sense of oneself and of things, which is greater than the self and the things, is no longer possible. The only sense which remains is being dominated by fate. If man builds his own God, he can from some time delude himself to lift up and emancipate himself. But this is an ephemeral exaltation. He's actually abasing God, and he himself shall soon be belittled. Soon, the ancient forces of fate that Christianity had removed will start to be within, to weigh on him. Some may continue to dream about unlimited paradises. Others, who are more insightful, will soon remind them that this fate cannot be defeated. It is at the beginning and at the end of everything, and the only resource that remains to man is trying to transform it and to love it. Ego fatum, amor fati. Yet, in the end, this atheism contains, and this is the most subtle thing to understand, and it is the most interesting for our time, it contains numb and lifeless the Christian history. It is a sort of dark side of a tradition that we take for granted. And it appears as an absolute pretension, which hides an absolute solitude, as a burning desire. And we heard it in Nietzsche's quotation. We saw it in Francis Bacon's portraits. It is a burning desire with nothing else to desire, too eager, a sort of an endless thirst with no water to drink. And de Lubac, these forms of atheism preserve many values coming from the Christian origin, but because they have cut these values from their Christian source, as de Lubac wrote, they were powerless and they didn't manage to keep them in their strength, not even in their own authentic purity. examples: spirit, reason, liberty, truth, brotherhood, justice. These great things without which we have no real humanity. And ancient paganism had loomed, and Christianity had founded. They soon become unreal, as soon as they no longer appear as the ray and the propagation of the light of God, as soon as the faith in the living God stops feeding them with His essence. They become empty shapes, empty forms, and soon they are reduced to become an ideal with no life, threatened by lies. And in this case, we can think about a sentence by Charles Péguy. He wrote on Kantism, on Kant ideology: Kant ideology has pure hands. What does this mean? That man believes with his reason that he can grasp and dominate the world based on the purity of his measure. So the Kant's ideals, Kant's idea has clean hands, pure hands, but it has no hands. And so, de Lubac concludes, what now? What are we to expect? Shall we go back to barbarity, as he wrote, to a barbarity which is undoubtedly different from the ancient one, but much more atrocious? 1943, a technical barbarity and centralized barbarity, as de Lubac said, a barbarity which is inhuman? Or will we be able to find, in different conditions, with an in-depth conscience, awareness, and with a freer and wonderful drive, the God which has been who's been proposed by the Church, the living God, who created man according to His own image? This is beyond all the problems that are pressing upon us. This is the greatest question and the greatest issue that we should think about. Just a few years after de Lubac writing, another important Christian thinker, Romano Guardini, focused on the topic of the end of the modern period, which is a title of one of his books of 1950. As Emilia said earlier, these are books which belong to a spiritual condition which is far away from our own now. Think that it was published in 1950, in the period of Reconstruction after the Second World War, the Western and Eastern blocs. But if you analyze the situation, you can see that something was happening in the past, and we are still experiencing some situations which are similar. So what is the reason of this end of the modern era, according to Guardini? He wrote that modern culture was born thanks to Christian values, but then it became anti-Christian because it reduced Christianity to its own values, but with no longer Jesus Christ being present. And Jesus Christ was the source of the values themselves, and so the building collapsed. As Guardini said, from the beginning of the modern times, a non-Christian culture is being elaborated. For many times, the denial was directed towards the content of revelation, not against the ethical values which developed according to the revelation. Indeed, the modern culture thought about resting on those very values, the Christian values, such as the value of personality and individual dignity, mutual respect, mutual aid, seen, and this is the point, they were seen as inherent possibilities of man, not as possibilities which man discovers by encountering others, something which man can acknowledge and can have inherent, thanks to his own strength. For this, the same Christian word seem to have lost their content. De Lubac has already said this, and Guarnieri repeats it. The Christian words become only words. Keep this in mind, because we will go forward to the conquest of words. Words are not only words. Now they are only words, empty words, abstract concepts. As Guarnieri said, those who today, in 1953, Natale e Capodanno, Christmas and New Year's Eve, those who want to express a thought explaining the Christian message have great difficulties. As soon as they use the words that have always been used for this thought, he or she knows that these words have become unreliable. Their sense has become faded and non-authentic. Those who talk constantly feel that the foundations simply are not robust and strong enough. Let's try and test this expression. Many go back to the ancient world because they are sure that they can find before Christ those eminent, absolute human values, thanks to which men can understand the present world. Yet this is not possible, because the real ancient men have something which was relentless. But since the coming of Christ, well, everything changed, because Christ looked at human beings, so that men felt looked at in such a profound way and in such a moving way that men could not take that gaze away. They can deny that gaze, the gaze of Christ. They can think they are purely pre-Christian, but this is impossible. Men may curse the look of Jesus Christ, but men cannot behave as man has never been looked at by Christ. So Jesus Christ holds that clarity, a tremendous clarity, with which he knew what is inside man, and he suffered human existence. That gaze cannot be repeated. Jesus Christ looks at the existence of man by suffering it, by taking it on his shoulders, and by taking on human suffering. And so Guarnieri said, as a prophet, the empty space of all of the last 20 years, Nazism and communism, but we may mention other ideologies of today's world. Well, all these ideologies existed in the ancient times, hence the sharp gaze of the prophet. And he concludes this way: the time which will come will create a terrible clarity, but it would be healthy. No Christians can be happy of radical denial of Christianity, but we need to discover the unloyalty of believing that man discovered something which is possible only with the encounter with Jesus Christ. And so he concludes, the reality will show when men detach themselves from the creation, and this is the end of the fruits of the creation. And so let's draw the conclusions of this first stage. There's a fil rouge linking the death of God announced by Nietzsche, namely the implosion of the bourgeois Christian values, supported without Jesus Christ, detached from the experience thanks to which the Western humanity had discovered them. So there is a thread linking the desert of human beings and the death of God. Men believe they can find in themselves the strength to carry out justice and to find happiness. But then inevitably they understand they are desperate. But as all the entire trend of culture of the second half of the 20th century showed, the drama of the atheist humanism and the end of the modern period have reopened. They didn't close anything. They've reopened with an unknown essentiality, the wound of the needs of man. Nihilism did not simply mean a loss and a desertification of human beings, but the existence of a need. The destruction of idols made free again the nostalgia of God. Yet this discovery and this new beginning could not be the outcome of a cultural analysis, but only the fact of hearing a voice once again, hearing an invitation once again, an announcement that could wake the human being, wake up the human being. Is there anybody listening to our cry? And this is a question we're going to listen to in a few minutes. And we can listen to the beautiful verses of the elegy in Duino by Rainer Maria Rilke. Rilke was also another prophet. And there are other important poems that we will listen to, all by atheistic poets. But they were all prophets. And this is the question which is awaiting and which tends towards the faces of the women portrayed by Edward Hopper, and which enlarges in the belly of the music of the great artist Johann Sebastian Bach.
Se anche io gridassi.
Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angelic orders? And even if one were to suddenly take me to its heart, I would vanish into its stronger existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror that we're still able to bear, and we revere it so, because it calmly disdains to destroy us. Every angel is terror, and so I hold myself back and swallow the cry of a darkened sobbing. Who then can we make use of? Not angels, not man. And the resourceful creatures see clearly that we're not really at home in the interpreted world. Perhaps there remains some tree on a slope that we can see again each day. There remains to us yesterday's streets and the thinned out loyalty of a habit that liked us and so stayed and never departed. Oh, and the night, when the wind full of space wears out our faces. Whom would she not stay for, the longed for, gentle, disappointing one, whom the solitary heart with difficulty stands before? Is she less heavy for lovers? They only hide their fate between themselves. Do you not know yet? Throw the emptiness out of your arms to add to the spaces we breathe. Maybe the birds will feel the expansion of air in more intimate flight.
Sì, certe primavere.
Yes, the spring times needed you deeply. Many a star must have been there for you so you might feel it. A wave lifted towards you out of the past. Or, as you walked past an open window, a violin gave of itself. All this was their mission. But could you handle it? Were you not always still distracted by expectation, as if all you experienced, like a beloved, came near to you? Voices, hear them, my heart, as only saints have heard, so that the mighty call raised them from the earth. They, though, knelt on impassibly and paid no attention. Such was their listening. Not that you could withstand God's voice, far from it, but listen to the breath, the unbroken message that creates itself from the silence. It is truly strange to no longer inhabit the earth, to no longer practice customs barely acquired, not to give a meaning of human futurity to roses and other expressly promising things, no longer to be what one was in endlessly anxious hands, and to set aside even one's own proper name like a broken plaything. Strange not to go on wishing one's wishes. Strange to see all that was once in place floating so loosely in space. And it's hard being dead and full of retrieval before one gradually feels a little eternity. Though the living all make the error of drawing too sharp a distinction. Angels, they say, would often not know whether they moved among living or dead. The eternal current sweeps all the ages within it, through both the spheres, forever, and resounds above them in both. Another great theologian, Joseph Ratzinger, dealt with the crucial issue of the relation between the past of Christian tradition and the living present of Christ and the Church in the world in its world-famous Introduction to Christianity in 1968. That was a most important year for the then professor and future pope. that he thought to be as the boom of the great cultural crisis of the Western world. This is what Ratzinger said. For the spiritual constellations of the past, the concept of tradition was a crucial program. It was as a solid structure, protection that man could trust. Today, the opposite feeling is true. Tradition is what is overcome, what is outdated by events, whereas progress is the real promise underlying the human being, so that man does not feel at ease in the tradition, in the past, but in the bosom of progress and future. This is also why, Ratzinger continued, a faith approaching man and labeled as tradition must appear to men as something outdated, which cannot be the place of its existence. Tradition can no longer be a place to live, a place of man's existence. To men that acknowledge in the future his projects, his future projects, and his future prospects. As we go on, the equation faith and tradition becomes more true. This assumption does no longer understand men of our times. However, this assumption is not all. And this is what I was interested in. These authors are not just intellectuals or analysts, they are prophets. They don't just analyze the situation, but they try to understand what is crucial, the secret key. It's not everything saying that tradition is outdated, is no longer a living place to live in. This assumption promotes a more radical concept, a more interesting concept, as in, by its own nature, Christianity is always something that's happening now. It's always connected to now. So the idea is no longer to say, alas, tradition is outdated, tradition is no longer alive. The idea is to understand that Christianity either is not or can happen now. The eternal is a history, and history is something pitching, making a hole like the tip of a needle in our present. Today we're here bewildered before this Christian revelation, and we wonder, and this is very topical, especially when we compare it with Asian religious worship, we wonder whether maybe it would have been easier for us to believe in the eternal wrapped in mystery. Maybe it would have been better for us if God had left us at an infinite distance rather than abandoning ourselves to faith. The faith is always a fact. Faith connected to only one figure, so that man's rescue and world's rescue depended on the tip of a needle. Christ with the tip of a needle that has an impact on time and affects time. Only by analyzing a topic this way have we fully understood the problem of faith, of Christian faith. So he wonders, can we still believe in something today? Or, more radical, we should wonder whether we can still, or maybe should we not stop dreaming in order to tackle the truth. So, this question asked by Joseph Ratzinger was echoed in a very beautiful poem by Pierpaolo Pasolini. It is a poem that Pasolini wrote as if it was a letter to a young Catholic. It took its distance, but it fully acknowledged that one calls, and the images you will see here are two self-portraits made by Pasolini, telling yet again another concept, going beyond to the pain by Francis Bacon.
A terrible fear. Happiness bursts against those glasses on the dark, but such happiness which makes your voice sing is a return from death. And who can laugh behind, under the frame of blackened sky? I'm not joking, because you have an experience of a place which I've never explored. An empty space in the universe. It is true that my land is little, but I've always unhappily told tales about unexplored places, as it were not true. But you are here. Your voice is here. The moon has risen, waters flow. The world doesn't know it is new, and its new day ends against the high cornices and the black of the sky. Who is there in that empty space in the universe that you have in your own desires and that you know? There's a Father, yes, Him. Do you believe I know Him? Oh, how wrong you are. How naively you take for granted what is not certain. You smile to the Father, that person of whom I have no information, whom I've been with in a dream I cannot remember. Yet it is weird. From that monster of authority also comes sweetness. Darn, how much have I ignored it? Ignored it so much that I do not know anything about it. What should I do? You give. You give. You need giving. You need offering. But you're present. He gave you your gift, like everything else. I pretend to receive. I thank you. I am sincerely grateful. Yet, the weak smile is not due to shyness. It is due to dismay, the most terrible dismay, more terrible to have a separated body. In the kingdoms of the being, there's a guilt, if it is not an accident, that instead of the other, for me, there's a void, an empty space in the universe. An empty space in the universe, and from there, you sing.
This is the last station. How can something new be born in this Christian tradition? Or maybe despite it, or maybe even against it? The Christian experience can never coincide with something which has already been acquired. That was written in 1952 by the great theologian Urs von Balthasar in his scandal book entitled Raising the Ramparts. The ramparts, in that case, were the defense walls wrapping and fencing the church versus present generations with its doctrine and institutional forms, where the new Christ should succumb to. This is a wonderful intuition, as in history and Christian tradition should always, and I quote, keep or reacquire its own vitality for the present and the future. History cannot just be history, and tradition can never be just tradition, because, and I quote, all that has been made so far is not yet what is now demanded by Christ, directly to me and you, to our generation. Without it, there will be boredom. Von Balthasar says and suggests that the point is not to be traditionalist nor innovators.
Sono categorie ideologiche, ecclesiastiche e politiche. Si tratta di capire cosa sia.
This is just ideological, clerical, or political categories. The idea is to understand what is Christian life, what is a sanctity. Just let's hear this great prophet once again. Von Balthasar wrote, there's two ways a historical structure can keep or reacquire its own vitality for the present and the future. One way is violent and comes from outside. It is a destruction of tradition, of monuments, libraries, archives, and so on and so forth. The second way is more spiritual and comes from inside. It is the strength of overcoming, of vigor, giving soul to all traditions. A vigor knowing the past, but however, can get away from this past if that is required by the sense of responsibility and willingness to look at the future. The second way, coming from inside, is demanding, Balthasar said, difficult. Overcoming from the inside, which is made possible by the concussive force of sanctity as opposed to the explosive force of bombs. And this is quite self-evident even today, unfortunately. But where can we see the force of this young sanctity if that does not penetrate the thick skin of those who believe they own everything? Therefore, and this is an acute remark by von Balthasar, we should look carefully at where young sanctity breaks the shells of the past to be born fresh once again in the contemporary and present world. This concept is echoed by Luigi Giussani in a very short but very important writing of 1960 entitled How to Educate the Sense of Church. Giussani wrote some more of a paradox, a charming one. And he wrote, and I quote, "The church is not so much the truth, rather as the method with which God gave truth to the world. Church is the continuation in history of the figure of Christ. The problem of church will be to find out and to live that method used by Christ. And that was also echoed by von Balthasar's writing, and I quote, "The truth of Christian life is like desert godsend. You cannot put it aside and keep it. Today truth is fresh, tomorrow truth is rotten. Truth that just continues to be conveyed without being redesigned and rethought loses its vital force. Where people are content with tradition, as in the transmission of acquired results, boredom prevails." And this is the vis prophetica by Balthasar, who says, all of a sudden, the storm will break out, and that will take away all the dead branches. Damage will not be a serious one, because what is now perishing has not been existing for a long time. I found a transcript of a conversation that was held here in Torello, near Rimini. Giussani was talking to some young people from Rimini, including Emilia Guarnieri, who at the time was very young. That was 1968. And that was the time of the crisis of awareness affecting Christians on the wave of disputes. And Don Giussani said, and I quote, and he told these young people, "To me, it's a sign of the times that it is we're no longer talking about tradition. It's no longer the history that can underline membership of Christianity. This is no longer the reason why people decide about joining Christianity. The only reason for membership of Christianity is meeting an announcement, Christianity as an announcement, not as a theory. An announcement is in a certain type of presence, a certain presence full of message." And as usual, Giussani was explaining these concepts to himself, and I quote, "It was not for the discussions made, it was not for the explanations given, it was not for the recall of the Old Testament. It was because it was a presence full of message. This is the reason why people were following Christ, because message is not a speech, it is a presence, it is a person. It is a way to be present for a person or for people." In the light of these remarks, it is impressive to read what von Balthasar used to say about one of the most moving examples and most convincing examples of sanctity, which can always start again and that can always promote and relaunch tradition. And I quote, "Everything depends on the awareness we have of Christianity. To Francis of Assisi, being Christian was so extraordinary, sure, incredibly awesome, just like being a human creature, a young man, a man. Being Christian means being eternal, having eternal youth, without fading away and disappearing. So immediate joy is even deeper. Nothing was separating man from Christ made into a man, from his cross and from his cradle. To Francis of Assisi, there was no dust or fading away of time in miracles. The liturgy of today was the time of his life, when God came over the times, fulfilling everything. It was not the end of Revelation, it was his beginning. Everything started to be like that from the origins of the world. En arche and logos. What should have the logos bear if not the beginning? Is this beginning possible? This is what Christ makes possible. Understanding the painful weight of man, as Rilke, in his ninth elegy, Duino elegy, recalls. It's like the great Basque sculptor Eduardo Chillida. In Bilbao, on the ocean, he impressed a picture on the rocks, and you will see this picture. There's a big wave of the ocean. On the one end, the wave breaks away the knots of tradition, but at the same time, the wave reopens up to tradition in order to welcome the unknown, in order to welcome the new. And Rilke, in this context, once again finds its own mission: give a new name to things, give a new substance to words. Words that once again are meaningful and can reopen man's heart, reopen man's senses, as the great Bach says in its prelude to its first suite of the cello solo.
Perché?
Why, if it could begin as a laurel and be spent so this space of being a little darker than all the surrounding green, with little waves at the edge of every leaf, like a breezy smile, why then have to be human? And shunning destiny, long for destiny. But because being here is much, and because all that's here seems to need us. The ephemeral that strangely concerns us. We, the most ephemeral, once, for each thing, only once. Once and no more. And we too, once, never again. But this once, to have been, though only once, to have been an earthly thing, seems irrevocable. And so, we keep pushing on and trying to achieve it, trying to contain it in our simple hands, in the overflowing gaze and the speechless heart, trying to become it. Are we here, perhaps, for saying house, bridge, fountain, gate, jug, fruit tree, window, at most, column, tower, but for saying, realize, or for a saying such as the things themselves would never have profoundly said.
Tra i magli.
Between the hammers our heart lives on, as a tongue between the teeth. And these things that leave, slipping away, understand that you praise them, transitory themselves. They trust us for rescue, as the most transient of all. They wish us to transmute them in our invisible heart, or infinitely into us, whoever we are. Behold, I'm alive. On what? Neither childhood nor future grow less. Surplus of existence is welling up in my heart.
Che ne è del nichilismo oggi?
So, what's happened to nihilism today? Maybe we could say this along with our prophets, that maybe, similarly to what Guarnieri wrote, we could talk about our period, our era, as the end of nihilism. Clearly, nihilism has not ended, and we are still experiencing a heavy air. But every time we must answer the ultimate question, each time that gaze looks at us that way, we experience the freshness of the beginning, and that at that moment something different begins. Nihilism can be overcome. Maybe it will take years, but the novelty is here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Volevo ringraziare.
I wanted to thank my friends Alessandra Cefaliello, playing the cello, beautiful music. The great Giampiero Bartolini, and the director and producer of images, Nicola Abbatangelo, who is at the back. Thank you, Nicola, and thank you to Fabrizio Sinisi Sinisi, sorry, who chose the texts. Emilia, hopefully we got it right. The experiment was successful. Well, I would say so. We were moved as we expected to be. We were moved as we expected to be, I said. As I said at the beginning, and during this event, I was convincing myself, and I said to myself that, yeah, you were winning the bet, you got it right. Tonight, we shared the excitement of realizing that we can be the protagonists, the key characters of this new beginning that can happen in the drama of history. And you've been helping us to do so. This is a lot. So thank you very much, Costantino. Thank you very much to you. Thank you very much to Giampiero Bartolini. Thank you very much to Alessandra. I'm going to repeat the names because we haven't said it enough. Thank you to Alessandra Cefaliello, Fabrizio Sinisi, and our friend and director who is at the back helping us with the images, Nicola Abbatangelo. So thank you very much. It was really worth it. So your work has really been worth it, and you've been taking a good risk, and it was worth it. I take the opportunity to underline that what we can enjoy at the meeting is something that we need to earn. We need to earn ourselves. And we need to earn all of this. Tonight, they provided a free contribution to create and to organize this event. And everything was for free, and I think we need to thank them for that. Because it is, nothing is ever taken for granted. And as we always say this year, we invite you all to contribute to the organization of the meeting through your donations. So in the different pavilions, you will find the station Donate Now, Dona Ora, and donations will only have to be done to the in the dedicated desks, where you will be welcomed by the volunteers wearing the green T-shirt with the writing Dona Ora, Donate Now. So thank you very much and enjoy your evening. Thank you.